to Dr. McDaniel.
All right. Hello, everybody. I love seeing your faces. Thank you for being here and screen on and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go backwards a little bit to module 2. I was just telling the team that after we finish this module, we are going to assume that you understand how to do those first few steps in the 5-step process and move on. So there's no content that kind of loops back to using the SDQ or using the sabers or cut scores or those sorts of things. So I'm going to kind of go back and kind of build that up a little bit for you and show you kind of some resources that we might not have explained too clearly and a practice opportunity for you. So and then we'll get into the kind of common questions that you guys had in the feedback form. So one thing to note is on the SDQ, there is where I describe how you would go to SDQ.org or com or whatever it is, or SDQ Info. And if you get in there, there are printed versions of the SDQ. You can find them in every single language, actually. So, but I don't want you going in there and printing out PDFs because we actually used to do that years ago. And we actually had to spend like 45 minutes of our training time teaching schools how to score them because it's really complicated. This is what I'm going to tell you why don't ever do it that way. Because it's a very strong tool, the SDQ. In most strong measures like that, we'll have reverse coded items. So you have to go through, you can't just count, you just can't count all the numbers because some 3s are actually 1s and some 1s are actually 3s. And you have to know which one of the items are reverse coded. Then the other issue is that the items don't appear in any kind of organization to the domains. So you'll have like a conduct item next to a hyperactivity item, next to a pro-social item, next to another high conduct. So then you have to find the items and pull those out yourself after you reverse code everything. And it's just a total disaster. So you can tell people that that is the website, but it's not for the purpose of go there and print off this actual piece of paper. I was just telling the team that we had one school who somebody wrote down the website, and between training and when they went to do this, they forgot about the Excel spreadsheet and they actually printed off copies. And then for the whole school, because they did it universally and they were going to hand score every single one of them. So what we're doing now is going back and hand entering every single one of them into the Excel spreadsheet. So there is, just so you know, there is a system in SDQ where you can pay their system and enter everything electronically, but you don't have to do that since I gave you the Excel spreadsheet. Tina, tell me what folder, so you guys should have folders of materials that go with every one of these modules. And so the SDQ was in one of those folders. I was saying you probably need to create on your own Dropbox or Google, whatever it's called, or your own thing, drag the materials into a tier 2 folder of your own so that after this closes, you still have everything. So where was that SDQ?
Do you want me to share my screen real quick, Sarah?
Sure. But what folder was it in? Oh, somebody says it's in module 1. Okay.
Yes, it's in module 1. So if you go into, are you seeing?
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you go into module 1 assessment, you'll see in here supporting resources. Click on supporting resources. And right here, this is the one, correct, Sarah?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
and it has one filled out for you. So you just clear all those, you just clear that. It's just the example is there for you so that, Tina, go down to the bottom and go to that 3rd tab that says answers. Okay, so that you can kind of see a score report. That's why it's already in there as an example. So when you copy this over into Google Sheets or whatever you use, you're going to, you're going to remove those little X's, but that's just to show you kind of what it looks like filled out. But that's the one you want to save a copy of because it has the formulas, and don't ever mess with that tab 2. That's where the formulas are. Yeah. So save that document and send that to the schools. There was another question about where the cut scores are. And that's another document that you probably should. So that's the overall cut scores there. That's the total. Remember, we did the total overall score first, and then we went to the sub.
Right. First, you look at the total score that's at the top and you say, refer back to tier 1 or right. So that's this one. And then the other is.
It might be in the next module. Are you still in module 1?
It's in this.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. Yeah. So just so everyone knows what we do in training. So if you're going to try to turn this around, what we do in training is print these off full page on cardstock, because that signals to your educators, this is an important document not to lose. We're going to use it over and over and over. So these 3 documents that Tina has, starting with the steps, we print these off on cardstock and hand them out so that they can literally have that out in front of them in their team meeting and find the cut scores on each of the subscales and find the intervention. So that's the other piece that goes with the rest of the SDQ. And then in module 2, if you look in resources, there is an opportunity for you to test your own confidence and accuracy with the first parts of this process. There is a case example. And so it kind of helps you think through, if you were sitting down with the team and this student came up and there's a question about the teams again, but that this is kind of the background information that the team has gathered. And then you have these scores. So then you can kind of think through, well, I've got to go back to that chart that Tina just showed me. I got to figure out, not that one, the other one. And then, oh yeah, overall first, and then that one. And then I've got to figure out which, so you can kind of practice with the case example before you go out, because we've noticed that it takes about 3 times of actually looking at the scores and thinking through the kid and discussing it before people feel fluent with actually doing it with a real student. So any practice opportunities you can get in, that'd be great. But that was put there so that you all would kind of be able to practice and get a little bit more fluent with the process, because it feels a little fumbly at first. It'll take a little bit longer, like, oh yeah, we got to go here and look at that number, and then this number is different. It's not one of those things where it's like a 5 is just the magic number for all those domains. It's a little bit different. So you've got to check each one separately. So that's why that was there. Did I cover everything, team, on the kind of pre-correct side?
Yes. So Sarah, I really appreciate you connecting all of that. I needed a little tier 2 supports with
Yeah. Okay. So I want to highlight some really great feedback and questions you have, and just tell you one thing I keep forgetting to tell you. So when we made these videos, we still were making a terminology error. So I want to correct that and let you guys know, or ask you to use a different terminology too. So we always discuss these as deficits. That's how the SDQ actually talks about it, and I'll talk about that measure in a minute. And we had a really great conversation with an educator who kind of brought up that just calling them deficits will shift us into deficit thinking, even though we're also looking for a strength, but it's real slippery slope. So what we try to call those areas are areas of need. So it's just a little bit of a shift in terminology. It's like, we don't say frequent flyers anymore. We say students who have multiple referrals. So we're just kind of making little shifts in language to be a little bit more inclusive and not shift our brains into thinking deficit. It's really just the area of need, which really, if you think about it, it's the same thing, but when you say it differently, it just kind of feels, it has a different feel to it, I think, when you say area of need. So the other thing is, somebody brought up a great piece of information on the SDQ, and actually, yep, there it is. It's actually already fixed in some parts of the SDQ if you look at their information online. So someone mentioned using the terms normal and abnormal are also problematic. Technically, that is what it is, but the terminology again is very important. So I think when you look at parts of the SDQ, like the most recent way they're talking about it would be, I think they call it like elevated, or there's another term that they use, and I would have to go look it up right now to figure that out. But maybe somebody could do that while we're chatting. But there was like a revised version of what we call that, and I think it was elevated, like maybe they still use normal, but then elevated instead of abnormal. So we'll look more into that. But that's also a great point. And actually, they actually already figured that out too. The developer of SDQ, it actually lives in Europe, and I've tried to get a hold of this person to ask these sorts of questions over the years. And there's another question that you guys had on one of the items, and I've tried to get a hold of this person, and he does not write me back. I guess I'm just little old Sarah, but anyway. And this is the same with any screener that you might use. There will be items. And hopefully the developers of the measures are really careful about these things. Some are less careful. But someone brought up a really good point on terminology and wording about one of the SDQ items, saying that the student's behavior was abnormal, or like they misbehave more than normal, or something, like one of those items. And I think if you want to kind of pre-correct with that with your teachers, to make sure that it doesn't become an equity issue where our unconscious associations are coming in, we're automatically more tending towards thinking through our more minoritized groups of students with that item. What you want them thinking of is, hopefully you have set some culturally responsive expectations in the building. They're not white teacher only expectations, right? They're hopefully culturally responsive expectations, a culturally responsive set of norms. And that's what you want to try, like those norms that you've taught and hold in your school, that's what you're kind of comparing that item to. So it would be a student who is not meeting Sarah's expectations. That student is generally not meeting these culturally responsive norms and expectations our school has agreed to. So it's a little bit of a shift there, but I can see that it could be one of those items that would be, without slowing down and thinking about it, it's one of those fast decisions with the wording that could lead to some unconscious associations for sure. Otherwise known as implicit bias, but we're not allowed to say implicit bias in the state of Alabama right now. So we have to call it unconscious associations. So anyway, there was another question about, so a few just really checkmarky quick ones that I saw. One, somebody was asking about progress monitoring. That's coming up. So that's a great thing to be thinking through. You'll start to think through and hear a little bit about progress monitoring on the next module, but the way it's organized is the next module is all the strategies and interventions that are in that chart. It's a little series of videos. And then the next module is where we really start to tackle progress monitoring, setting decision rules, and making database decisions. So that's coming up, but it's really good that you guys have that on your radar. Someone else said, this is great, but where are the interventions? So that was a great prelude, because the interventions come up next, but we have to know this kind of the process that comes before you actually would put the interventions in place. And I also want to do another pre-correct and just let you know, when you're talking to educators, there are some of them that I would actually just call strategies. So, you know, if you think through strategies and interventions, a lot of times people use those terms interchangeably, but the field tends to use strategies as something that are super quick and easy and simple. And interventions are things that are more complicated, that have multiple components or need more resources. So I kind of think about them in those two ways too. And so if you tell a teacher that you have to do interventions for 52 students, that's going to kind of make the hair on their back of their neck stand up and be like, no, we cannot do intervention for 52 students. But if you say, we have 52 students who will require tier 2 strategies and interventions. And then those really kind of lower scores, students with just little new things that are popping up that aren't on that higher level, those are your strategies. So really simple things like goal setting. A behavior contract can be a strategy. So you kind of want to make sure to explain to them that they're not all super complicated interventions. Those would be the lower ones down towards the end of that chart, and they're all organized in level of intensity because of that. Some of our students just need a quick strategy. They just need a grown-up person to check in with them once a week, and we're calling it goal setting, and they're going to fill out a form once a week. That's a strategy to me. An intervention would be, we have hired a behavior interventionist whose job is going to be check in, connect, and expect. They are with this group of students all day. They're running groups. They're pushing into the classroom. That's an intervention. But something like a weekly goal setting sheet is more of a strategy to me. So it's usually helpful to try to explain to educators that tier 2 does both. That we want to start with a simple strategy. Sometimes that's all we need. And then we can get more intensive from there. So I wanted to mention that. Tina, can you monitor the chat? Because I do this thing where my brain tries to read, but then also talk at the same time, and that sometimes doesn't go very well. So
Sarah, we got a whole team monitoring the chat. Don't worry.
Oh, good. Okay, team. All right. So we did the item on the SDQ. We did progress monitoring, interventions. Okay, somebody had a good question about what does this look like individual versus group? And this goes along with what I was just saying with strategies and intervention. So within tier 2, it's super flexible. So there's a lot. It's not just going to be scripted for everybody, but what else is flexible is how you deliver these strategies and interventions. So a goal setting worksheet can be one-on-one, but it's still not intensive. You could have check in, check out as a group intervention where the whole group meets in the morning. Everybody gets their sheet. You check in with everybody. Everybody puts their name on it. You send everybody to class. Then they all go get their scores throughout the day on the DPR. Then the whole group comes back. You could do a group delivery of that. You could do group social skills lessons. So some of those interventions, to intensify it, you would actually shift to individual. So if you started a student in group social skills lessons, let's say a 7th grade female group, and they're all having similar social skills problems, and the group of females have met for 6 weeks, but you have a few students in there who group dynamics and just need a lot of repeated practice, they need something different. So you may pull those 2 students out and do individual social skills tier 2 with them instead of group. So it's kind of flex. That's why we need a team talking about these sorts of things. Obviously, if the student at the base has social problem solving issues, sticking them in a group is just putting them in the exact context that they already struggle in. So if you got to think through those sorts of things, and similarly, putting them in a group led by a male when it's a group of females who none of them get along with male. So you got to think through that sort of thing too, and making the decision, is this something that efficiency wise we want to do as a group? Or is this something that for that student makes a lot more sense to be individual? The other discussion with group, not to kind of blow your mind with too many different options here, but sometimes we have actually suggested, so for elementary, where those kiddos are in the classroom all day long, if you've got 20 students in the classroom and a good 10 to 12 of them could use tier 2 around the same thing, some of these we can flip to class implementation. So nobody's ever going to be harmed by extra social skills lessons. Nobody's ever going to be harmed by having an adult grown-up mentor or setting a goal or monitoring on task or check in, check out. So there are some things that if the threshold gets so high of so many students in your classroom need it, you could just flip a lot of these into classroom delivered interventions too, or strategies. So, really good teachers sometimes just use these strategies as part of differentiated classroom management in tier 1, goal setting, visual charts, those sorts of things anyway. So there's lots of different ways you can apply this. We actually have a few schools who the risk is so high in the building that they do some of these tier 2 interventions like social emotional learning, social skills, goal setting, contracting. They do it at the universal level because there are so many kids. If you were trying to do tier 2, they just flip some of these over to tier 1. So that helps that. There is someone else who was asking about teams. There's a lot of discussion about teaming and problem solving in the upcoming modules. But I do want to say that it's hard for me to tell you all what the teams look like. So a few things I do know, and then I would love to hear from you guys. I do know it doesn't typically work well when you create a brand new team. So it does help to leverage this work within an existing team. We also have learned that the tier 1 team can sometimes be a good tier 2 oversight team, but that is not the same team. So we have some schools that say, well, that tier 1 team, they've already been to PBIS training, that should be the tier 2 team. So what's a little bit different for tier 2 and tier 1, so I can help you guys think through what this may look like in your schools, is that tier 1 is looking at school-wide data. So not necessarily specific students or their family backgrounds or any kind of function related. It's all this school level behavior. So the where, what location, what time, what day of the week, what infraction, so that you can reteach those expectations school-wide or maybe even class-wide. So that's what that team is looking at. What you want your tier 2 team looking at is actual individual cases of students. So because it's now individual students, what we tend to see work best is that the grade level team that student is in, so if the student is in 5th grade, that the 5th grade team is who's meeting about that 5th grade student. Because a lot of what we're going to discuss when it comes to setting decision rules is that mastery criteria, or moving back to tier 1, looks like whatever 5th grade behavior looks like at our school. So if I'm a kindergarten teacher and I'm a 3rd grade teacher and I'm a 1st grade teacher, they may not know really well what 5th grade mastery level normal 5th grade behavior looks like in our school. And they may not know that student either. So it's really helpful to use a grade level team. It gets a little bit more complicated with secondary unless your students are teamed out, like a 6th grade team, like team 7A or something like that. And then high school gets even a little bit more crazy because high schools are typically in departments and not grade levels anymore. So as much as you can, when you start thinking through that team, it's got to be a team who knows kid level data, not school level data, because that's what you're looking at, and then knows that developmental level and that normal levels of behavior and social emotional skills in your building. So what works best here is that our RTI team, we're actually pretty good at that here. They do academics. They're pretty good at reading and math and writing. We link on the PBIS team onto the RTI team because they already understand how to identify students who need some extra support because they're already doing that, who's in whatever percentile on the reading screener and the math screener and the writing screener. So they understand that logic. And then it's usually a grade level team. And then that team has already been addressing students with academic issues. And what's really great, if you can figure out a way to do this, is that a lot of our students have co-occurring needs. So if we're meeting about that same student on Tuesday at 3:30 for math, we may also be meeting about that student on Thursday at 3:30 for behavior. So let's just talk about the two together. Most likely they're tied, especially escape-based behavior. So we want one meeting, and here we call it the problem-solving team. So it's this tier 2 level team that's usually grade level that we call the PST, or the problem-solving team. And it really links RTI and those skills that they have for understanding the difference between a oral reading fluency deficit and a spelling deficit or need and a comprehension need. So they understand that academic stuff. That's what we're trying to teach them about the social emotional behavioral needs too, so that they can talk about those cases of students together. So with that, I know that was somebody's question, and maybe Tina, you can help, but does multi-tiered systems of support look like that in Pennsylvania, where you could have a team that could feasibly address both domains of academics and social emotional behavioral?
That's what we're striving towards, where we're integrating our academic partners with us. And we do talk about problem solving teams at tier 2. So we can provide more support in that area. We did have a project where we were working with our math colleagues to look at math issues and have a strong PBIS team as well, and how we can better integrate. So that's still an area that we can definitely grow in, but it makes complete sense what you're describing.
Yeah, and I will warn you against this. So on their own, they'll default to a few things. They'll default to, well, let's just let the tier 1 team do it, because they already meet on Tuesdays at 3:30 or whatever. And it's totally different. So that doesn't really work. You would think it would at first glance. The other thing that they do tend to do is say, well, let's just combine this with the tier 3 team that's already meeting. And the caution there is that if the tier 3 team is doing intensive, individualized, function-based behavior intervention plans with a student, and there's an IEP even involved, you would hope that there was a family member. Like it's a whole different feel from tier 3 too. Also, I should say, because we don't have that. It's not that. So sometimes they will try to say, well, we'll just leverage that tier 3 team for tier 2. But it's a different way of thinking for tier 2, because we're really, really trying to put something efficient and brief in place so that we can get back to tier 1. And that's a little bit of a different activity that a typical tier 3 or IEP team would do. So you could try it out. We haven't seen any work well long-term doing it that way, but I just thought I would mention that's a tendency that they will, an idea that they'll have. So, okay, there were a few of you who there was one question, any screeners that allow younger students to rate themselves? You can give the SDQ to any age student. I will just let you know though, just in general, humans and brain development and maturity, the younger they are, the less accurate they are at self-evaluation, just any kid. They just don't spend all day kind of worried about whether or not they're doing the right thing, so that when on a random day you ask them in general, do you do the right thing or whatever, they're like, yes, of course I do. I'm great. Everybody tells me I'm great all day. I'm 5. So it's just, no, you can give that same SDQ to them. You can see the way that they word the child answers on the SDQ website, and just you can type that into the same spreadsheet, the items match up. But it just may not be super helpful. But there were several people saying, what do we do about the resistance that we are going to have when we ask our school to use a universal screener? And so first of all, solidarity, whoever is already predicting that is going to happen, that is going to happen. So you know your schools well. They don't like jump for joy when you tell them that there's another thing they need to do. So just some tips that we've learned along the way. First of all, we emphasize the importance of the universal approach and the difference of using a more teacher nomination approach versus universal. And so in that conversation, we heavily emphasize the fact that they will under-identify specifically students with emotional symptoms, and how concerning that can be when we are not identifying and addressing emotional symptoms. Because remember, that is your somatic complaints, withdrawal, social isolation, even some anxiousness and phobia. So we want to address those. Typically, and nothing against teachers, it's just what we do. That's not who's on their radar. So who's on their radar are going to be the students who are most disruptive. So that's one thing we emphasize very, very much. And right now with COVID and mental health issues, depending on grade level too, especially around middle school, we really need to find every single student in the building with some emotional symptoms who could use some support. So that's one reason. The other thing that does tend to help is that we say, well, let's think about the academic screeners that we use. And I will give it to them that typically, so my kids right now are in the middle of a winter screening. And for that, it's a little bit of a different procedure because at least for our kiddos here, they're using iReady as a screener. And so the students for these 2 days, so it's Tuesday and Wednesday, so yesterday and today, the students are on their Chromebooks for 2 hours. It's not really taking any time out of it's what they normally would have been doing during reading and math, but it's not taking that teacher's time. The teacher's not filling it out. For academic screeners, I will give it to them that the students are the ones that have to do it, but it's the same procedure. It's the same thing. So we're using academic screeners to try to identify students below at 30 percentile and lower in our building who need some support or whatever the threshold is. The other thing to know is if they would just try it, we usually do, like for secondary, we'll say, whoever you have in third period, that's who you're filling it out on. They'll find that for a caseload of 20 to 25 students, that's all they would have. So they wouldn't do every student they ever see in secondary. That's all they would have. And it should take them less than an hour. So once you see the items and there's 25, you're reading them all very carefully. In the beginning, it takes a little bit more time, but once you get going and you filled out about 5 or 7 of these things, you will see that it just goes a lot faster on clicking. So that is, those are the 3 main things that we use. First of all, emphasizing universal and being able to identify all of our students who need support. Second of all, kind of linking it on for them that we already do this for academics. So this is social emotional behavioral is the foundation for academics. So we also need to find those students. And then third, just reminding them that once they get fluent at it, it really is once a year in the fall. Throughout the year, they can still use, I think Tina Lawson is starting to struggle. It's January 12th. I've seen this behavior popping up for a few weeks. I'm going to go ahead and fill out an SDQ on her now, but it wouldn't be the whole class again. So 1 hour that they could give, maybe a principal could cancel a faculty meeting and give everybody, go back to your classrooms and fill this out. So other than that, those are the strategies we use. If you have any other ones that are coming to mind, feel free to share, but that is a very common kind of pushback. We have some schools who say, just so you know, who say, well, we're going to start this process with referral. And then next year we're going to do this universally. Okay. Just know if they're starting to fill out the SDQ on students who were referred to them, they're going to end up with a pile of students who have very high scores. And then they'll think that's normal, that all of their tier 2 students have very high scores, but it's going to be skewed to the students who are having the most problems in the building. That's who they're going to refer first. So in that first batch, it's going to look like tier 2 is addressing severe needs, but only because they've referred the students who have had the most issues in the building. Does that make sense? So it won't be the normal group that ends up if they're doing it that way. So they get a little flustered with that because they're like, whoa, these scores are high and there's lots of areas of need. And we have to explain, like, if you did this universally, you would have a whole set of students with just really low strategy kind of needs. And then you would have the smaller group that does have this kind of more intensive intervention level of need. So, okay, let me check real quick. Okay, when used in conjunction with ODRs and teacher nomination, how do you recommend addressing when the data, say from the ODRs and the nominations, suggest a different area of need than the SDQ? So what's interesting about this is it shouldn't happen, and here's why. Teacher nomination is teacher opinion. ODR technically is a teacher's opinion of that behavior in that hallway on that day also. it's supposed to be the actual student's behavior, but we all know it takes the teacher seeing and judging and coding, categorizing that behavior to send to the office. And then the SDQ is also teacher perceptions. So they're all three teacher perceptions of student skills and behavior. So if they're saying different things, that would be kind of strange, but I would probably just go with the SDQ because an ODR doesn't let you consider the fact that it could be emotional symptom. And teacher nominations probably thinking about disrupting the classroom and not seeing that there's actually underlying emotional symptoms or whatever. So because the SDQ is more thorough, I would probably go with what that one says. The other thing is on that, it may be that a different teacher filled out the SDQ. This actually happens with secondary, that the 7th period teacher filled out the SDQ and they don't see the behavior in their class. So I disagree that that student doesn't qualify for tier 2. So not to complicate things, but if that happens, then you can say, well, sure, you go ahead and fill it out too. We'll either average the scores or we'll take yours and we'll do that intervention in your class or that strategy, not in 7th period, because that doesn't appear to be when we're having an issue anyway. So you kind of deal with those on case by case. You'll have some educators who think that's going to happen all the time. And in generally, we just haven't seen it play out that way. It's every once in a while, a student won't get picked up for tier 2 and a teacher will start to question that. Honestly, sometimes it's the teacher, it's not the student. The student doesn't demonstrate that behavior or that need anywhere else in their day. And so it's kind of hard for teachers to hear that, but there's something about what's going on in that classroom. And maybe that teacher is just very frustrated with that student and those sorts of things. So every once in a while that happens. Okay. And locate the intervention categories, potential interventions. Tina showed you that. So that was the 3 colorful PDFs. You guys should probably go ahead and print those off. If I could, I would print them all off and mail them to your offices. You could hang them on your wall. But yeah, you should probably go ahead and print those out so they're at the ready. And then the last question I had there was about teaming again. So we'll get to more of those questions. So then for, I'm talking about, so anything else on questions before I kind of preview?
Sarah,
Tina, how much time do we have left? Sorry, I lost track of time.
No, that's okay. We still have 20 minutes.
Okay, good.
There was just one quick question in the chat. Looking for an Excel doc to score the self-rating. Would it be the same Excel doc? Would it line up with that?
Yeah, so what you would need to do is look at, so if you print out the 2 paper copies side by side, it's both 25 questions. So they line up. They're just worded differently for the kiddos. So what I would do, and I haven't done this yet, but what I would do is I would just, in that Excel doc that we gave you in tab 1 where the questions are, I would just edit those questions and have it be the kid version. But it scores the same because it's the same. You see what I'm saying? Okay. And also depending on child age, you might want to edit further some of those items, just to make them a little bit more kid-friendly language. And you can do that. You just don't change the kind of nature of the item. But I'm thinking if somebody asked the question about very young children. So if you were thinking about doing that for a 5 or 6-year-old, I would probably word some of those a little bit differently. So, okay. Oh. All right. So the next module is all of the information for these strategies and interventions you will need to be able to teach people how to use. And so just the preface of all of this, I want to make sure to reiterate this, and it's said in those, but okay, no, I won't say none. The only category that requires high level of skill for this intervention that's listed here is the emotional symptom category. Everyone else, these could be put in place by a bus driver, a grandparent volunteer, a custodial worker, the school nurse. I've been thinking forever, except for, minus COVID and taking temperatures and contact tracing. In normal times, a school nurse would be an amazing tier 2 implementer. My point is, or the librarian, the point is that we want to take an inventory at our school of all the grownups, and with secondary, you could actually do a lot of these peer mediated, but all the grownups who are good with kids. So at my children's school, they love their SRO. They call him something Akoff. It's not sergeant, but patrolman Akoff, I think is what they call him. Anyway, so he would be a great tier 2 implementer because he gets along with kids. He's really calm. He understands behavior enough to not take it personally. He helps them self-regulate. He builds relationships like crazy. So what you really want to find is who would do these things would be the grownups in the building who are really good with kids. And there may be a grown-up who's really good with like a coach, like let's say the football coach, probably really, really good with male students, maybe just making some assumptions here, maybe not as relatable to female students. So you could even go a little bit further there. But my point is, you don't want your educators thinking all of these require, board certified teachers to implement. They don't. They're actually really simple. Most of them are honestly relationship building and talking through and reminding what the expectations are. Are you meeting the expectations, and providing reinforcement? At the core, that's what all of them actually are. The one area that takes a skilled person who we don't want to push this off on anybody else is the emotional symptom category. And the way we usually talk about this, and you'll see it on the video, is that we just say, if it's in this area of need, then we're moving it over to the school counselor. And the school counselor can then decide, okay, can I fit this student into my small group, sportsmanship group that already meets on Tuesdays? Do I need to meet with the student individually? Is this a referral for mental health services? So in that one area, because of how fragile that area is, because small needs can turn into big problems, we do let the school counselor deal with that. Everybody else could be anybody in your building that's good with kids. I always say, I don't know if you would feel comfortable, but I always say, please do not give us any grownups who are terrible with kids to do tier 2. It's just not ever going to work. It's going to be more punitive for students than functional at all. If it's a grown-up that just doesn't jive well with students. And I don't know if you have those in Pennsylvania. We definitely have them here. There are just some grown-ups who just have a really hard time at that relationship building piece. So probably not the best people to assign tier 2 to. Also for our little ones, or even the secondary, sometimes they tend to put the classroom teacher involved with tier 2, but sometimes that relationship between the classroom teacher and the student has already devolved. So if that's the case, and they've had a few run-ins, disagreements, sorry, I keep coughing, then make it a different classroom teacher, not that one. So it's a little bit different there. Okay, so that's the who, like who would do these things. And you can see that I'll explain all of that. And when you get to the video modules, they're organized by category. So that should help you. And just remember that peer problems and pro-social get combined, because at the base, it's the same problem. I'm trying to think of what else you may need to know. You won't see a lot on emotional symptoms other than kind of a soapbox of this is very important, and make sure a skilled counselor or mental health worker in the building knows about this and is taking on that case. There are a few caveats on these interventions. On the people again, we've seen, I had one principal, an elementary principal, and he was amazing. He really was. And he really, really loved the kids and got along with them well. And so he volunteered to be the check-in, check-out. I think it was check-in, check-out he volunteered to do with students, a group of 6 students. The problem became, and they all loved him, that wasn't the problem. The problem became, because he was the principal, he got pulled all the time to do other stuff. So we couldn't actually get the intervention in place, and the students felt really let down because they were kind of excited to go see Principal what's his name every day, but half the time he wasn't there because of course he's dealing with a sub not showing up and a bus breaking down and the air conditioner not working or whatever. So there is some thinking that needs to go into, can this person also show up consistently? Because it can introduce some trauma or some harm to students when it's a grown up that the whole purpose is to do some relationship building, but then that person's too busy or doesn't show up consistently. So that's it. There's just a lot of these little considerations that you guys probably think about. But when it sounded like a great idea to have this principal be, and he was so excited about it, but in practice, it just didn't work out. So something different may have worked well with him. Like he could have been who they see at the end of the week if they met their goal all week. He could have been tied to the reinforcement system from that intervention, but probably not the person delivering the actual intervention. So, and then Tina, you might want to pull up the folder again for module 3, because I'm hoping we got all the resources in there. So some of these are there, you'll see example PDFs or example Word documents. And you can edit any of those. You can search, whatever website you want to find and find a different example of behavior contract or goal setting sheet or a different self-monitoring intervention. All that is fine. What we try to do in the resources is give you examples, which you can take, you can edit, or you can go find your own. You'll see in the videos that for each intervention, what we try to teach you is what are the core components of that intervention that make it that thing. And then beyond that, you can adapt it and probably should to, well, we're going to switch that. We have iPads at our school. So that student will rate themselves on the iPad instead of a piece of paper, or we're going to do weekly because we already have weekly class meetings. So we'll do that thing weekly instead of daily, whatever, on the different adaptations that will work for each school. Tina, do you want to summarize the folder and just make sure everybody knows this time? I should have been telling you to look at the resources there.
Yep, just give me 1 second. So the module 3 is not live yet in the Schoology. Sonia works on after this presentation. That all opens up tomorrow. So I did want to just give people a heads up. It will be set up the same way. I did just have it open and it's not showing now. Here it is. There are three videos that you have to watch. So in organizing your time, there is much more time you need to devote for this module than you did for the others. So the videos are about at most 40 minutes long, but they do address the different areas. There's module A, 3A, 3B, 3C, and 3D. I believe one of the modules does not have a video, right, Sarah?
Yeah, that's going to be the emotional symptoms because of the,
right.
Move it over to the counselor.
Let me just share my screen really quick to show you. It will be the same setup as last time. Are you seeing the Schoology folders? Yes, It's the same setup as last time. You'll watch video A, video B, C, D, and then all the supporting resources will be in this folder. And if there's any confusion with what resource goes with which video, you definitely just put a question in and we will get it to Sarah to help us to best know what way to coordinate that. But just know between now and February 2nd, these videos, it is a longer time. Here I have it. So the video 3A is 36 minutes and 36 seconds. Video 3B is 30 minutes, 26 seconds. And video C is 21 minutes, 31 seconds. And then video D is 11 minutes, 23 seconds. So it is more time that you have to devote to this module. Just letting you know that up front.
Yes. And sorry for having more time, but you should see that they move pretty quickly once you get in there because each one is several strategies and interventions. So.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm not complaining about the length of time.
I know, I was just thinking how we could shorten it. And then I'm like, no, Sarah, you can't shorten it because then the people won't know how to do the thing. So I was just thinking that through.
And I want to address something. I got a private message. So we are not saying as a network that this is the only way to address tier 2. we are looking at, this is one universal screener that we are suggesting you use. And what we have been hearing over and over in our network is that we don't give enough interventions that best fit the needs of students. Like, what do you do other than check in, check out, right? What can you do? So this is one way to help you look at your students and their needs and cater it to these different intervention pockets or containers that Sara and her team have worked on to address more nuanced needs in our tier 2 supports. So this is not like, we're not saying don't use any of the other universal screenings that we had, SSRSIE or whatever you may have been using. I'm drawing a blank on the other ones. But this is just one more tool in the toolbox that is very, I find, scripted, prescriptive of how do you meet these individual needs, which is what we've been asked for the last couple of years. So so I wouldn't want to cut the time. I probably am planning out when we meet again. I should have given more time for this, but you know what? You're my firstborn and I'm going to mess up on you. And right, Sara, you've got a firstborn. You mess up on your firstborn all the time. So just know that, you know, Sonia will make the course live tomorrow for all of you to get started. And also, while I'm talking, I'll just say this. When you look in here, I just want you all to be aware of this. When you look in here in the course itself, module 4 is listed here. Well, actually upcoming is, I clicked on it, so it disappeared. The February one is in there, and that's where you'll register to get into the February course. So I'm going to stop there and just let you continue on, Sara.
Okay, well, and I was going to say something. So I was trying to find it while you were talking and I didn't. So, but if anybody wants to see that same grid on how things match up to the Sabers, it's really, really similar. So they use different language, like I think emotional symptoms might be called internalizing, and then conduct might be called aggression. So that one, it's like almost perfect lineup there. There's a category in the Sabers that will tell you academic deficits, but again, you would know that from an academic screener. And I'll just address the SSIE because I know a lot of you have used that before. So that will tell you students who need tier 2. And then the next set that it's going to give you is internalizing or externalizing. So if you are using that, internalizing does match on to emotional symptoms that we've been talking about. Externalizing, though, on the SSIE includes things that are social issues, things that are inattention issues, and things that are aggressive and deviant behaviors. So it doesn't break those, it doesn't tease that apart anymore for you, but maybe the team can sort that out in their discussion, in their team meeting, and then you can still use that grid in that same way, that instead of it being an SDQ subscale, it's the area of need that the team has identified that student needs intervention in. Does that make sense? So if you're gung-ho on the SSIE, it will tell you internalizing, that just go to that emotional symptom category. That's the same thing. And then it'll tell you externalizing. So then the team's going to have to break down externalizing a little bit further in order to figure out what's the underlying cause of the externalizing problem behavior. You know, the reason why we do that is because you address the behavior differently based on what the underlying cause is, because the interventions are very specific to the root cause, and that's how they work. The mechanisms and the interventions work on the root cause of the need. So that's why it has to kind of match up, but the team could sort that out. I have confidence in educators doing that. I was going to see if I could share this with you. So
I think for our purposes, to really learn this piece through the SDQ is the best, like to really get a grasp of your system makes sense. And then we can generalize it to the SSRSIE and sabers and blah, blah.
Yeah. So the savers would be here, it just adds one category, which is academics. So that's really your RTI side of the team anyway. And then so this might be called internalizing, I can't remember. And then conduct might be called aggression. But I was going to show you kind of visually the way we think about it would be on like an SSIE. What it would tell you, the internalizing is actually all of these different things usually here. And then the E, the externalizing, is actually all these different things here. So they're these more nuanced threads than just internalizing or externalizing. And so that's why we get it is a little bit more complicated, but that's why we get a little bit more precise with matching the intervention to the more precise area of need, if you can find it. So that's all kind of couched in if you can do that. Otherwise, maybe the team can learn to recognize, or it can be part of the discussion that, oh, this only happens during academic instruction and it's a low level behavior that happens high frequency. And then that would cue everybody in low level, high frequency academics. That's usually an inattention issue. So you could figure that out on your own too. Okay, but that's a great question. I know that it's not like we have like a federal mandate of use this SDQ. It's not meant to be that way at all. But I'm hoping that you guys are getting used to that kind of the problem solving thinking that needs to happen at the tier 2. It's just like when you get to your problem solving at tier 1. So it doesn't matter if you have iReady data or PowerSchool data or Swiss data, right? You've got to figure out the whole problem solving is where's the problem, who's having it, how do we fix it, how do we go back and reinforce it or change our procedure. So it's that same thinking that I think we're trying to norm here. So
I think that was a great way to wrap it up for today. We are kind of running out of time here. Thank you so much. This time goes so quickly. I just want to make sure that you saw in the chat lots of appreciation for that rope. A lot of our colleagues that are involved with academics, that was a perfect visual. So thank you. A few requests for sharing that if you were open to that. Also for the rest of the people on the call here, I did put that registration for the next one in there if you didn't get to grab that. So that would be for February 2nd at 1. Just a quick reminder.